because both sounds are kind of like cancelling each other out. So this plugin is called Ozone by Isotope. It's a mastering plugin. It's got loads of different stuff. It's got equalizer, reverb, maximizer, harmonic exciter, loads of stuff. But the only thing I really use it for is this multi-band stereo imaging. And what that basically means is you've got your frequency bands up here, and you can choose for each band how wide you want your sound. And this is incredibly useful for when you're sort of making synth sounds and bass sounds and stuff like that, because you know you've got to keep the low end mono if you want your tune to work, and also for cutting to vinyl. If you've got stereo bass, it's not going to run. Stereo distorts, and also the grooves won't work properly on the record. Ask your mastering engineer about that. So yeah, on the low end here I've got completely mono, mostly mono, very slightly sort of kind of what a narrowed, and then sort of actually use this to widen it even more on the very tops there. If you're going to use sample delay or anything like that, kind of bear in mind that you might need to attenuate where you've made it sort of stereo. Both those sort of basses, the main bass and the sort of top end bass, are now going to their own bass bus, so I've got complete control over the level without having to fiddle with all these different channels. So my bass aux is there. If I solo the side chains as well. That's the essence of the main bass, and then underneath that I've got a sub doing a simplified version of the pattern, and I've used the Trilogy for this, just a standard ARP sign, a little bit of glide on it just to give it kind of just a bit of a sort of attack, really, just a bit of punch. Sometimes I have a bit of pitch wobble just to add a bit of character. I don't think I've done that in this tune. On this I've got a compressor, side chained again. I go a bit overboard with the side chaining, but it gets my mixes nice and loud. That's to the kick and the snare this time, not to the same sort of signals as the bass, and that is just to make sure that it doesn't interfere with my kick, or vice versa, the kick doesn't interfere with the bass, because like I said earlier, my kicks have got a lot of sub in them already, so I need to make room for that by dipping out the sub, and that's dipping it out quite a lot, but it's not really affecting the rhythm. So, and on top of that, an EQ, rolling off everything sort of above like 200 Hertz. Sometimes I do it to 100, but I wanted a bit more of a tone in this one to kind of gel all the basses together. So if we just listen to the bass and the drums together now. Like when you play it with the drums, you suddenly don't really recognise where that sort of low end bass comes from, and it just sort of becomes this kind of like inconceivable kind of pattern. Like, I don't like bass lines where like you can hear someone just like with a Reese sound going on the keyboard. I like bass lines where you kind of you know, you might be able to figure out how they did it, but it takes you a while, because you sort of like, you know, you've got LFOs, you've got side chaining, and you've got different layers doing different rhythms. So it's quite hard to place your finger on how it was made, and that's how I like to kind of do my bass lines, and that's the sort of bass line I like to listen to when I listen to other people's music as well. I like to use different basses for edits and stuff, and there's this edit here is a good example of what I like to do. So I've got two sounds there. I've got the sort of main sound filtering up. When I do edits, I like to drop stuff out, have stuff getting further away with reverb and high passing out, and then sort of bringing in something low endy and wide again to just sort of like kind of bring a little bit more height before the drop. So I've got this kind of just copy of the actual top end bass line down here. Again with sample delay. And a filtrator, which is a wicked filter that I use all the time, just doing a low pass, a quick low pass. You can see the auto, just like that, just to kind of bring something in from the bottom as something's disappearing out through the top. So that sound I quickly made on Massive. It's nothing complicated, but I might as well just show you how I did it. I started from scratch. It's based around the Scrapyard waveform. There's a little bit of pitch modulation from LFO 6 over here. It's very slight, but what I've done is I've made the amplitude of that LFO be triggered by the key tracking. So the higher up the octave, the more it wobbles, and low down it kind of stays still. So as your notes get higher, the sound gets more character, and it saves you automating kind of, you know, your mod wheel or stuff like that. So I've got that layered with some just really simple squares. And I've detuned these oscillators as well, just to kind of fatten them out a little bit. If they're all playing the same sound, it doesn't sound as fat. So if you detune it by 10 cents either way, then you kind of get a much fatter sound. I feed back the whole thing. If I look at the routing, the feedbacking is coming after the filters there and before the main effects. And I've got a daft filter as well, just that's rolling off the tops because I want to make the tops on this through distortion. So I've put a really heavy tube. So that's beefed it up no end. It's beefed up the low, and it's also kind of put some grit on it. Some reverb, and the reverb is getting bigger as the sound goes on through this envelope down here. So I've just put an envelope on there. EQ, just boosting the tops and a little bit of the bottom. On the channel itself now, I've got just a simple distortion, logic distortion, driving it pretty hard, to be fair. That's also driving the reverb. So on the tail you're getting this sort of like even bigger reverb now, which is cool for some parts of the tune, but I didn't really want all of that, so I've high pass filtered this out using automation on the filtrator again. So that's my kind of disappearing bass. I usually bounce down anything I do in massive like this, and I also always save my presets. Like, I can't stress how useful that is. Just go into the file and save them, and I've got a whole bank of sounds that I can draw from at any point now. Whereas I used to just have to kind of recreate what I'd already done or go back into another project. So bounce them down mainly because the processor gets eaten up by things like massive, especially if you have like 4 or 5 in a track. The tune starts to kind of glitch out a little bit. So yeah, that's most of the basses in the tune, apart from in this 16 over here, where I've done a variation of the main bass line. This is where like crazy synth lines come in, and I needed a bit more space on the top, so I've dropped out this whole kind of gritty top end bass line in audio, and I've gone for just more of a wobble on the sample of the massive sound. And this is a cool little tip, actually, something that I've been doing a lot of recently. If you look at the MIDI here, you'll see they're all different velocities. In this instance, the velocity is not controlling the volume at all of the sound. So if we go into the sampler, you'll see why. I've got the velocity to level slider all the way to the top, so the velocity is not making any difference to the level of the sound. What it is doing is routed down here to the LFO speed, and this basically means that gone are the days of me sitting there drawing in loads of automation to get kind of different wobble effects. It's really handy for basses in dubstep as well. They love their wobble, and rather than kind of having different samplers for each wobble sound, you can do it all on one just by changing the velocity. So that kind of works with the drums quite nicely over this section as well. The wobbles sound a little bit random, but that's probably because I just kind of fiddled around with the velocity until they sounded roughly right. So if I just listen to the drums and the bass there. And that's kind of just a bit more of a drop down section, so I didn't want the kind of the top endy sort of bass, A, to kind of give it a rest, and also B, to make room for the synths. A little mention on sort of general breakbeat arrangement, I suppose, before I go into the sort of how I made the synths of the next section. Like, I come from drum and bass, and at that tempo, 16 bars, it doesn't feel like a long time, but a breakbeat, 135, to me, 16 bars feels like a long time, so I generally add, like a mini breakdown, maybe like 24 bars into my arrange. So you get your drop 16, you get little pickups that come in on the second 16, and then I have a little 8-bar kind of like bring it down and then bring it up again, just to kind of make the next section like even more hype. There's also a lot more changes in it than kind of a lot of music. I don't write progressively. I don't write tunes that kind of just sort of like slowly build. I write kind of big sort of drops, and then I'll have different sections. So I have like kind of like I've got different bass lines going on later on. I've got different synth lines, and it almost becomes, the second drop sometimes almost becomes like a different tune. And that's just the way I like to keep my tunes interesting, because I get bored easily, basically. So I've got this little 8-bar bridge that goes into the sort of crazy sort of pickup section. I'll just play it to you and I'll just explain what I've done.